The other night, I sat down with one of Marathon's lead writers, John Goff, to discuss Marathon's story and all the surrounding details. And I gotta say, he revealed some pretty interesting stuff that I am very excited to reveal. So, John is one of the lead writers over at Bungie, and he has been for well over a decade now, but to us Halo fans, John Goff might seem like a rather familiar name. Well, there's a reason for that. At a very nascent Pfhor 3 in 2009, he wrote part of Halo Evolutions. Specifically, John wrote Headhunters, so he was the one who created not just the Spartan 3 Headhunters, but also the Silent Shadow. Two things that I think it's fair to say have become fan-favourite elements of Halo's universe among the community. He said that story, Headhunters, was a really good example of what he likes to do in storytelling. He likes to plant seeds that later germinate into something much bigger. John then came back to Halo a little while later to write Hunting Party, in which the Silent Shadow are reintroduced and also assimilated by Atriox into the Banished. And then of course they went on to have at least a decently large role in Halo Infinite. And then among a few other projects, John has also done extensive work on both Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 stories. And when I say extensive, as you can see by his credits on screen right now, I mean extensive. He's worked on a lot of story stuff for Destiny. So let's get into the questions then. The first question that I asked is a very simple one, but I got a very interesting answer. And that question was simply, is New Marathon canon to the old Marathon? The only reason I asked that, by the way, is because I know there are some people out there who are adamant that New Marathon isn't canon to old Marathon, and well, John's answer completely dispels that myth. Yes, the old games are canon. Everything that happened in the original trilogy happened. But he caveats this by also saying that not everything that happened was necessarily true. Now, of course, that's the case with Marathon Infinity, because 6 out of the 7 timelines in that story are failed timelines, and thus literally aren't canon in the main timeline of the Marathon story. But when I was at Bungie, I was told this, and when I was told it, it was alluded to that it was referring specifically to the AIs. So a lot of Marathon 2 in particular is basically rampant yet metastable Durandal and rampant angry Tycho going at each other, with Tycho in particular being literally stuck in the anger stage of rampancy, and thus is rather irrational throughout that game's story. So I think it's fair to say that Tycho may have bent the truth to his will a few times. But there are also some other unexplained details in Marathon 2, like, for example, how the hell did Durandal manage to mysteriously escape Tycho's capture and then go from being his prisoner to literally destroying his ship and beating him so hard that he burns an epitaph to Tycho in Lawan's moon? There's going from 0 to 100, and then there's that. One of the goals of the new Marathon is to experience the aftermath of what happened in the original trilogy through the eyes of the runners who don't know what happened, much like most of the player base. And this is your pretty classic Bungie storytelling method. He said that how original fans of Marathon discover the connections to the original story is part of the experience that they're building. They want fans not necessarily to one-to-one relive the story beats of the original story, but rather to relive the experience that they had in discovering that original story. Not to relive specific story beats of the original story, but rather to see where those story beats might fit into a new experience that also at the same time feels in line with the kind of character of original Marathon. They want to tell new stories that are also built such that eventually long-running fans are going to start noticing things that start to feel a little bit familiar. So the next few questions I didn't really get much of an answer for. The first one was, with Marathon being an extraction shooter, how are you going to be delivering the story? And John simply said that this is something they're going to be diving into later on, so I assume much closer to launch. And then the answer to the next 3 questions was just no comment. And those questions were, how frequently can we expect major story beats and in what form? Do you have a time frame in mind for the story that you want to tell with Marathon? And also, will you bring back Vidmaster challenges? Now, if you don't know, Vidmaster challenges actually didn't start with Halo 3. In fact, they're a pretty long-running staple in Marathon. They started with, I think, Marathon 1. And we haven't had them since ODST, so I'm praying. My next question was, will the interconnectivity between Destiny, but more importantly, Halo, be upheld? So quick rundown if you don't know, there's been this long-running theory for a long time about the Bungieverse, in that in some kind of ethereal way, all the Bungie games are connected. I mean, Pathways into Darkness and Marathon absolutely are connected, but there's so many references and connections between Marathon and Halo, and also Marathon and Destiny, that it starts to seem, when you line them all up, like all the universes are connected in a way. This is something that Bungie have never officially acknowledged, and it's more than likely just kind of like not an inside joke, but like inside little tongue-in-cheek references between their IPs. And John's answer was that yes, they will be upheld roughly to the degree that we're already used to. They aren't trying to build a multiverse or anything like that. They want Marathon to stand very much on its own with the new story that they're telling. They don't want to oversell the messaging in creating connections between the universes and have people thinking that, like for example, Destiny and Marathon are in the same universe just because there was one little reference to Destiny in Marathon. But they will still be peppering stuff in to allow the franchises to show love for each other, just like they have done in the past. Now, it is worth noting that, of course, Marathon originally didn't have references to Halo or Destiny, but rather, Destiny and Halo had references to Marathon. And so, if New Marathon had zero references to neither Halo nor Destiny, then it would actually be very in line with how original Marathon handled this situation. That said though, I am really interested to see where they take this stuff, given all the extra context for connections between the franchises that's come out since original Marathon ended. I mean, Halo is just brimming with Marathon references, especially in the early days, and Destiny's got its fair share as well. Now, this next question was a bit of a reach, but I was quite surprised by the answer that I got, and that question was, can we expect to see the Pfhor again? And John's answer was a very ambiguous, but ever so slightly teasing, I don't know. He said that they're of course part of the same franchise, but he also then reiterated that they're coming at the Marathon universe from a different angle with this game. They're exploring where and when this new story takes us to those familiar places, and also how and when the old and new worlds are going to collide. But with this new story, their main focuses are the runners, the mysteries of Tau Ceti, and the ship. He said that where our runners, almost like Indiana Jonesian adventures on Tau Ceti are going to take us is, quote, anybody's guess, but he did say to expect the unexpected. So, when John mentioned the ship, of course, the titular UESC Marathon that we actually saw in the trailer, I had to ask him the question, will we see the UESC Marathon play a role in the story? And all I got was an ambiguous, yet slightly teasy shrug. And now it's interesting, because I believe it was in Marathon 2, it was said that the Marathon was actually destroyed after Durandal kidnapped you from it at the end of the first game and I guess the start of the second game. It's implied that when the Pfhor came back to Tau Ceti after the first game to wipe out the colony that this new Marathon is set in, they also destroyed the Marathon. But clearly, we have a hollowed out moon with a ship inside it in the original trailer, which is essentially what the Marathon was. The Marathon was Deimos, Mars's moon, converted into a colony ship. So maybe this kind of pertains to what John said earlier about everything in the original trilogy being canon, but not all of it being true. Maybe Durandal lied about the fate of the Marathon so the Marine wouldn't be tempted to ditch him and try and return to Tau Ceti and save it, so that instead he'd stay on Lawan with Durandal and help him find the lost Spit clan. You know, I really have a feeling that Bungie are going to be building the story of this new Marathon absolutely in this vein, with mystery and subtle ambiguity at its core to keep us theorizing and guessing over long periods of time, instead of just serving us answers on a silver platter. And honestly, I adore that kind of storytelling. It's a style of storytelling that they used to use here and there with Halo, and it's also the exact kind of storytelling that made me fall in love with classic zombies and also FromSoft games as well. Either way though, this game focuses on Tau Ceti, and what hangs in the orbit of Tau Ceti? Why, the Marathon, of course. And you know, it's funny, I actually didn't realize how much of a presence the actual Marathon has in the reveal trailer until now. I mean, surely that has to mean something. The next question that I asked was a very reachy question, and that was, will wider elements of the Marathon universe, like the Jjaro and the Workenkakenter and stuff like that, play roles in this story? And again, I got a similar answer to my other reachy questions, which was basically no comment, except with some more details. So John said that the main focus with the story is initially on the runners, on building the runner fantasy and establishing this new angle to look at the marathon universe from, but also that old stuff is by no means being ignored nor forgotten, but that it needs to fit in with the cadence and the pace of what gets uncovered in the new story. It really seems to me like their first and foremost goal is not to re-deliver the old marathon story, but rather to re-deliver the old marathon experience, the experience that we had uncovering the story in those old games for the first time ourselves using our own agency, and to allow new fans to experience that kind of magic via a new story that's also set in that old universe. I then asked him if the runners are going to get their own backstories, and his verbatim answer was, "We'll get into that." And then the final question that I asked, which gave us some really interesting insight into the way they're going to be delivering the story, was, what's your favourite thing about telling a story specifically in an extraction shooter? And he said, if we do it right, we get to build a world that's more experiential than told. We get to build a world first and foremost over just telling stories. The most important stories that we the players will tell are the ones that we make on runs with our friends. Their stories, Bungie's stories, will never be more important than that. And I gotta say, that is a very, very classic Bungie way of approaching storytelling, especially player-driven storytelling. That is like almost verbatim the exact mantra they had with Halo. But then specifically on the story itself, he said that they want to tell stories that we the players can take some kind of ownership over, and that extraction shooters are a great genre to do that in. He said that telling just linear stories makes it too easy to fall into the trap of just telling stories that aren't really owned by anybody, whereas they want to build a real and reactive world that feels like more than just a story. This style of taking ownership over a story is, again, very classic Bungie, and John even said himself that that storytelling style shares the exact same DNA as Destiny, as Halo, and even OG Marathon. He said that there are going to be multiple avenues to get people into the story, so there will be some kind of linear stuff, but there will also be a lot of discovery and experiential storytelling as well. And that also there are going to be different tiers of interest that you can have in the story and still enjoy the universe. And again, this is something that Halo did in abundance, right? Casual story fans just play the campaigns. More hardcore story fans read the terminals, and then ultra lore fans like us read the books. Again, that kind of player-driven storytelling is core to the DNA of Bungie. It has been for over 30 years now, and by the looks of it, Marathon 2025 is going to be carrying forward that DNA. And then the last thing that John said was that they want to create a world that feels alive and reactive to the consequences of your actions, which again falls in line with that DNA. So it really feels like Marathon's story overall is going to be very much player-driven and player-uncovered, and I mean, that's a good thing to me because I mean, you look at Halo, for example, there's a reason that we're still discussing and analysing mysteries from Halo 3 and even Halo 2. I can't speak much to Destiny, but Marathon and Halo's stories were never meant to be like entirely delivered to you on a silver platter. Much for the same reason that I adore classic Zombies and the way that it told its stories, Bungie's storytelling DNA has always made the player an active agent in piecing together what's going on. There's a time and a place for linear stories, and John did kind of tease that Marathon would be doing some of that, but at the same time, its focus on having the story be experiential and be discovered by the players instead of just being hand-delivered to them by the devs just immediately hypes up the immersion. That's exactly why Halo 3's terminals were such fascinating bits of story to uncover, or why piecing together Reach's datapads was so enthralling. The devs weren't just telling us what everything meant, we were the ones trying to piece it all together and trying to read between the lines to uncover the true meaning ourselves, and that is why those stories are so memorable and iconic. So, big thank you to John for actually coming on and doing this video, I really appreciate it. We did say that closer to launch we're going to do this video again, but with questions that can be more pressing and, you know, a bit more reachy, because obviously right now they've only just revealed the game, there's not much they can really talk about, but close to launch, well, that all changes, so make sure you sub so you don't miss that. And so, with that said, I'm going to round this video out there. I want to give a massive thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there as per usual. Thank you all so much, and thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.